Welcome to the Mindset Advantage podcast with Dr. Tricia Gardner and Elliot Rowe, episode 14. So Tricia, what have you got for us this week?
Well, I wanted to talk about the ideal afternoon snack for poker players. And did you know there's actually a tasty food that helps to boost attention?
Tell me more.
Actually, studies have found that dark chocolate can increase attention.
Excellent. So last time we were recommending walnuts and we've moved up to chocolate now. So there's a big step forward.
A big step forward. But let me tell you, there's a couple of key factors. It has to be dark chocolate and it has to be at least 60% cacao chocolate. So if you go to the store and you're just like going to get a Snicker bar or something like that, that's not going to work. It has to be, a good quality dark chocolate. And it can increase attention and focus. And I thought this would be great in the afternoon because, a lot of times in the afternoon you get that little bit of a slump. But there is another side to it. Chocolate being a stimulant, it activates the brain, but it could also increase blood pressure. So I do want people to be aware of that if they have any blood pressure, issues at all. That would be something, just to maybe speak with your physician. And you might consider also having some green tea with your dark chocolate. And the reason why is because there's a substance in green tea, and I believe you pronounce it L-theanine. I'm not sure how you pronounce that, but it actually can help lower blood pressure, and it helps produce those alpha waves in the brain, which are very calm and peaceful.
Excellent. So we have the perfect combination of dark chocolate and green tea for your afternoon grind.
That's right. And so I expect to see everybody out at the World Series with their dark chocolate and their green tea.
Ordering their green teas. Perfect. And then today on the show, we've got Terrence Chan coming on. He's a long-time poker player. He's on the 2+2 poker class, and he's also an MMA fighter. So he's the perfect guest for us in a lot of ways. And he's coming on today to talk to us. So let's give him a call. So hi, Terrence. Thanks for coming on the show. If you could just introduce yourself to our listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. My name's Terrence Chan. I was born and raised in Vancouver, Canada, and I started playing poker probably around 17 or 18 years old. I kind of wandered into a casino. There was no online poker then. I just took an interest to it and a liking, read all the books. I went to work for Pokerstars for a couple of years, and then I decided to play poker full-time for a living. And I did that for about 10 years or 12 years, and along the way I took up martial arts. I took up Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Muay Thai, and decided I wanted to get into MMA a little bit because that was a lot of fun. It was a good complement to playing poker. So I've been competing in MMA for almost 4 years now, I guess. I've got my next fight coming up at the end of this month, May 30th. So yeah, I'm a poker player and a mixed martial artist, and I understand that you talk to a few of both on your show.
Yeah, you're the perfect in-betweener. So,
I try. It just means I'm not really that good at either of them, at least compared to the guests.
But you're the best for our show. So no.
Yes, it's something.
So you found your niche. It's our radio show.
I'm glad to hear it.
Well, now I think you're selling yourself a little bit short because I've heard people refer to you as, at least at one time, the best heads-up limit hold'em specialist in the world.
Yeah, I mean, it's always hard to know exactly who was precisely the best. But I was certainly at the highest limits, and I was very successful at 200, 400, 500, 1,000. Those kind of levels around 2006 to 2009. Those games started drying up a little bit, and it was hard to make a living at those games. But I did well, and I was successful at high limit, heads up hold'em. I was successful in limit hold'em tournaments. It was just a game that just I got lucky at, I suppose. Not in terms of getting lucky for a number of years, but getting lucky in meeting the right people and having that social peer group to speak with, and just learn more about that game. And once you find like a game that you tend to make money at, some people are different. Some people, they end up diversifying and going into other games, which is smart. But other people just sort of try to get as much money as they can in the immediate. And that's, I guess, was my path.
What was it that was so important about your peer group, and how do you think that really impacted your ability to go on and become one of the best?
Sure. I was around a lot of really smart players, Bill Chen, Matt Harvalenko, Jared Ankinman, a lot of people really that I was able to bounce poker ideas off of on a regular basis. So we would talk about hands, we would talk about, distributions and global strategies and all of these sorts of things. And we all made each other better because we were able to do that. And now it seems fairly obvious. I think it's very commonplace, but back then it was much less common to discuss these. Poker was very solitary craft sort of up until maybe the mid to late 2000s, other than maybe a few internet message forums and things of that nature. But, it was rare that people actually did a lot of research and a lot of insights onto poker in those days. And so we kind of had that advantage starting out.
Yeah.
And with it being, you're the limit hold'em expert, what do you think about the scientists coming out saying that they've beaten that game now? Do you think that's accurate? Or is that something that you think is, is good advertising from their front?
Well, in terms of the solution, I can't say I'm really knowledgeable. I can't say for certain that they have or they haven't. It certainly seems as though they've come up with an excellent solution. Whether or not it's the perfect equilibrium strategy, I don't know. I'm not qualified to say that. But it certainly seems that even if it's not perfect, it's at least as strong as the best players in the world, it would seem right now. And that's obviously a really important landmark. When this happened in chess, it changed the chess world. So there's certainly that aspect of it too that's going to make limit hold'em a little bit tougher.
So how did you go from poker to MMA? Like, what just lit that fire within you?
Well, yeah, it's not the most natural transition, I guess. Well, part of it was being introduced by a fellow friend who was a poker pro, and also my cousin who's never been involved in poker, to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And they both started doing it, and they told me it was really cool, and they started showing me old DVDs of fights from, Pride and UFC and all that kind of stuff. And I would even sort of, with my cousin, who's actually smaller than I am. I'm a small guy. My cousin's even smaller. We would grapple, and he would catch me in these, arm locks and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, this is really cool. And I hate losing to my cousin in a fight. He was older when we were growing up, so he always used to beat me up because he was always the older cousin. So he would beat me up and bully me a little bit. And then as an adult, I was bigger than him, and it still didn't. I still couldn't beat him up. So that was very frustrating. So I decided to take up some of this jiu-jitsu myself. And my first day of jiu-jitsu, it was a small 115-pound girl who put me in my first footlock and submitted me with a footlock. And I just thought, this is pretty cool. I kind of have to stick at it. And it's obviously a really hard thing when you're a small guy. Jiu-jitsu and fighting and most sports really are quite terrible. They're very hard at the beginning if you're a smaller guy, but I really enjoyed it. And as I got more into jiu-jitsu and I'd had a little bit of a Muay Thai background as well, I just decided, well, I like watching the UFC on TV. This is pretty cool. Maybe I should get in there and try this out one day. And and that was 4 fights ago, and I'm about to have my 5th.
I obviously work with UFC fighters and poker players, and people are sometimes surprised to hear how similar the mindset is needed between the two and dealing with the high pressure situations, the risk reward and things like that. Did you find that the mindset you developed in high stakes poker helped with sort of the high stakes of going into MMA?
Yeah, I think they're different but similar requirements for the sort of mental toughness that is required. So in poker, the mental toughness that's required has a lot to do with dealing with adversity in the sense of just bad luck, of you're running bad, don't go on tilt, don't punt off your stack, just keep plugging away, always reevaluate and always re-examine, but don't ever get too frustrated. With MMA, the hard part is, there are many days where you're just not on point and you're getting beaten up and you're getting beaten up in the gym, and there's very little luck or variance in that sense, because
until it comes to Nevada judging.
Yeah, I guess there is that bad beat. Yeah, there's a few. I mean, actually, Nevada might be better than a lot of states. I see the ones like in Texas and stuff like that. It's true, no, but it's true. Yeah, I mean, I'm not even talking about the fight itself, because I mean, fighters spend such a small percentage of the time actually fighting. They spend most of it training, right? So when you're in the gym and you're getting beat up on by your teammates, whether they normally beat you up or you normally beat them up, it sucks because you feel like, oh, I'm just not sharp. I'm not any good at this. What am I doing here? I shouldn't be doing this. It's like, this is silly. I'm not meant for this. I'm a poker player. I'm not a fighter. There's so many ways that you can potentially just have a negative mindset that you just have to avoid, because it's so easy to lose your confidence in something like MMA where you're literally being beaten down on a day-to-day basis,
Yeah. And I think one of the things you said there was quite interesting, just how small the percentage of the year is actually spent actually fighting for a professional fighter. Because you hear a lot of people say, oh, why are they complaining about the money? He's just made $10,000 a minute or whatever it might be. And the UFC is substantially less than that. But, people aren't taking into account the whole year of training that might go into just 2 fights, and just how low the wages are if that's the case.
Yeah, that's really silly for people to say, like, $10,000 for a minute, $5,000 a minute. Because like you said, I read a stat today that something like Frank Edgar and Uriah Faber have spent like 9 hours in the cage or something like that, which is amazing, which is mind blowing. And these are 2 guys who have fought a ton. But even then, if you're talking about 2 of the most prolific fighters, they've probably both spent 15, 20 years training, 20 hours a week or so. Like you add that all up, that dwarfs 9 hours. I mean, and then you talk about the financial aspect of it. Yeah, like 20,000 per minute or whatever. You consider after taxes, after medical, after paying for their training, after paying for their equipment and food and supplements and all this kind of stuff. Fighting is not a great way to make a living if you're not one of the best in the world. I mean, I sort of feel that way about poker too these days. Now poker, you can still be a pretty good poker player and make a pretty good living, whereas it's hard to be a pretty good fighter and make a good living. But definitely more opportunity exists for poker players, at least financially.
And there was something that's quite interesting, because you've been in the game for so many years around poker. Mm-hmm. I sometimes have more difficulty with guys who've been playing since the mid-2000s in terms of how professionally they need to take the game versus the new guys who've only been playing for 2 or 3 years. Yeah. And the new guys are treating it like a professional sport. And some of the guys who've been around a longer time are sort of saying, well, I like playing in my pajamas. I like smoking a joint while I'm playing. These sorts of things. And there does seem to be, like, they were so used to making money in the good days that they're not as competitive as the much hungrier, new guys who've come to it realizing that it has to be taken as a professional sport now.
That's exactly it. It was, I mentioned before that I was making a lot of money in the mid 2000s and I didn't diversify into other games. I didn't, maybe I realized that the limit hold'em money train wasn't going to last forever, but I never said, well, maybe I should start from the ground up in PLO or 8 or better or triple draw or any of these kind of things and work hard, because I didn't have to work hard. I was already really good at limit hold'em, and on my worst day, I was probably still good enough to make, hundreds of dollars an hour. And it was too easy. I mean, it's a blessing and a curse simultaneously. Obviously, if you financially spent your money well, invested your money well, then you're doing fine now. But you're right. It is so much harder. And it is so hard for me to, say, jump into an 8-game mix and just really dedicate myself to relearning these games, because, like I was at this elite level and it is hard. And it is one of those things that if you really want to be a great poker player in the year 2015, you do have to constantly study the mental aspect that you guys do and the strategic nuts and bolts of how to play on the flop, turn, and river.
It's so interesting because we just saw the kid win the APPT grand final. Charlie, I can't remember his last name right off the top of my head now, but he just started playing poker in the last 2 years.
Wow.
But he's just gone balls out, from day one, working on his game, and he just wins the high roller at the APPT grand final just a few days ago.
That is really amazing. And the internet age obviously provides that, because, it would have been really hard before internet poker for anybody with only 2 years of experience anybody can win a tournament, of course. But if you talk about, something like an APPT high roller with a really deep structure against all the best players in the world, that's a really hard task to get at that level. Even neglecting the idea of building a bankroll to play 25,000 euro events, that would have been really hard. And when I started playing live poker, I was playing 4-8 limit, and then I slowly moved up to 10-20 and 15-30. But that's a process of over years. Now, if you're able to 12 table and you a lot of these guys are able to do 12 table, 10 hours a day kind of stuff, and on Zoom, then they even have the ability to get far more hands. And and if they're thinking about those hands and they're not just mindlessly playing them, of course they're going to get good really fast.
And just to give the proper shout out, his name is Charlie Carroll. So just so everybody knows.
Yeah. And in terms of your poker now, I know you mentioned you're not playing as much, but you are thinking of going to the World Series. Do you think there's still much more of an edge in live poker when you compare it to the competition online?
Well, I think the World Series is always going to be quite good in terms of ROI, just because there are so many casual and recreational players. I mean, I might be one of them, but it's able to draw everybody who thinks they're even kind of remotely good at poker. The guy who's just the best guy at his home game back home, or at his bar or his golf club or whatever. Those guys all show up to the World Series. Business folk who don't even think that they're the best players, but they show up because they love playing poker and they love playing the World Series. The glory hunters who want to show up and win a World Series bracelet. All the kind of stuff just combines for a better money-making opportunity. So yeah, I'm still going to go to the World Series. I don't think you'll find me in too many of the $25,000 shorthanded events and things like that. Is probably a situation where I'm a dog, or if I'm not a dog, it's certainly not a big advantage very much. So yeah, I still love the World Series, and it's fun to me. At this point in my career, I do think of myself as sort of a serious amateur. I try my best, and I do play very hard, and I do work on my game, but it's not what I count on to make a living. And I also don't go into it with a mentality that it's like a job for me, and I have to be really successful at it and make it priority number one. And
out of interest, when you're in Vegas, obviously you've got the MMA side as well. Do you go and train at the MMA gyms, or is it Vegas is about poker, I do MMA the rest of the year?
I love training in Vegas. I typically train at Cobra Kai, Jiu-Jitsu, and I really like it there. I like the skill level is great. There are lots of guys my size. I really like the training methodology that's used by Simgo in Vegas. I know you work with Drysdale. He's kind of a competitor of sorts, but and I've competed against some of his students who've been really tough. So I've competed in Jiu-Jitsu against some Drysdale's guys. But I really like training in Vegas. Obviously, people in Vegas, when they train, they take it pretty seriously, because because of the culture of Vegas being kind of the fight capital of the world and all that, or, it's just create a critical mass of MMA fighters and grapplers.
Well, there are so many gyms there, and a lot of people cross over between the gyms, and there's so many professional fighters in every, when I've walked in and out of the gyms there, there are always well-known UFC fighters on the mats, just all the time.
Yeah. I remember, you just kind of, or even if you walk into a gym and you don't see a UFC fighter, you might see a guy who's going to be a UFC fighter in 2 years. I feel that way a lot of the time when I'm at a gym in Vegas. I'm like, well, nobody's ever heard of this guy, but I wouldn't be surprised if we're watching it on TV in 2 years, just because he's like wiping the floor with black belts, that kind of thing.
When we had Drysdale on, he talked about just the lengthy process that goes into becoming a black belt in jiu-jitsu. Mm-hmm. So how far are you on that progression, or is that something you're even after?
It's not really. I'm still a blue belt in Jiu-Jitsu. I've been a blue belt in Jiu-Jitsu for like 4 years. I haven't trained very much in the gi over the last few years just because of the MMA thing. I probably will go back to it because it's a nice change of pace and sort of what like I was talking about with Limit Hold'em and playing other games. It's probably good to diversify and put myself in an uncomfortable situation. I really like no gi Jiu-Jitsu and I enjoy it and I think I'm a little bit better at it, but I should do gi just because I'm not as good at it and because it does make me uncomfortable, because I feel like maybe I should learn that lesson a little bit. I didn't much in the way that other people got good at Pot Limit Omaha and I didn't go that route. I don't want that to happen with my martial arts training as well. So yeah, I'm a blue belt in Jiu-Jitsu and but maybe going back to it soon.
And one of the things he was mentioning in Jiu-Jitsu, which surprised lots of the poker players I speak to, is the idea of decision trees in martial arts and the different combinations of moves. Do you find that there's some crossover from that side when you think about what you need to do in poker and then, switching from a certain position into an arm lock, into a leg lock, etc.? Just this idea that there is a decision tree for everything to some extent.
Yeah, I really do think there is. like an example from gi jiu-jitsu might be, your cross collar choke into your arm bar. The better your cross collar choke is, the more the guy has to raise his hands to defend his collar, and then you're attacking an arm bar. And so in poker that may be having a certain distribution on the river. The more bluffs you have on a certain board, the more you can value bet, is the same kind of idea. Now, what's different is that, of course, in grappling or an MMA or whatever, you have to make that decision very quickly. Your pattern recognition has to occur nearly instantaneously. It has to be instinctive. You don't get to sit there for 45 seconds on the river deciding whether, well, gee, maybe he just threw a left jab. Maybe I'll slip it to the outside and try to throw a hook to the body. Well, maybe I'll just try to, you don't have that kind of decision-making time like you do in poker. But in poker, often I find that if you haven't thought through the decision before you get there, you'll often just make the poor one, because you're in a situation where you're under a lot of stress, and when you're under stress, you might just go to your default behavior, and that may or may not be the right move. So if you've sort of figured out already what you should do or what your distribution should look like in advance, then it becomes much easier. And so in that way, poker and jiu-jitsu, or poker and grappling, are very similar in the sense that you have to think about it before you're actually in the situation, because often when you're actually in the situation, it might be too late for you to sort of figure it out.
I know that you're a huge fan of Tim Ferriss and his podcast. So in the Tim Ferriss vein, who do you think is the most punchable person in poker?
That's a wonderful. That is great. I didn't expect that to happen, because I've heard him ask that question so many times, and I figured nobody who listens to his show must ever have listened to any previous one, otherwise they'd be ready for it. And here I am in this situation. Boy, you kind of have to. The stock answer would have to be Phil Hellmuth, almost in the sense that he's smug and he's in some ways so deluded about his own skill, and I can't figure out whether that's like a positive about him. He's obviously really successful. I mean, you guys probably have a better insight to that. Is he successful in spite of having that attitude, or is he successful because of that attitude? But sometimes he just blows my mind. But I wouldn't really answer that, because I wouldn't want to punch Phil. I don't feel like he's done actually anything worth being punched. I mean, I would have to say somebody like Russ Hamilton is far more deserving of a really, really good punch.
Just a really good face punch, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the least that poker players could get. I would like to think that if we ever get that opportunity, maybe the poker players will nominate me, although maybe they'll get a guy, and I wouldn't blame them for that. Maybe Martin Kampman. Would be the guy.
He can do the punch
for that.
And I guess in terms of, segue into tilt, I mean, what's the most extreme tilt you've seen over your career? Have you seen anything crazy when you were playing live? I know there's some sort of videos of fights at the poker table have been out this week.
Yeah, I do the 2+2 podcast, and we talked about that fight today. That was a crazy video.
It was a really good fight actually in New Orleans. So you've got the YouTube.
Yeah, I mean, the smaller guy, the guy who was sort of being antagonized, seemed to have some wrestling background. Kind of picked the guy up with the gut wrench and kind of tossed him on the ground. Good ground and pound. It was that guy I didn't see coming. Yeah, so I've actually been challenged to fights at the poker table before because of tilt. Once because I was underset against the guy, and I just hit quads, and he called me a cocksucker a few times, and I kind of asked him, I suggested to him that he might want to stop using that particular term. Nothing ever came to it. I don't really believe in street fights or fighting at the table, but nothing really stands out in my head as just an obscene example of tilt that I don't think anybody who listens to your show probably has already seen themselves, screaming, kicking over chairs, throwing things. My co-host on the show, my good friend Adam Schwartz, has broken about 15 mice, I think. But to his credit, he quit breaking mice. But he used to just regularly, have to go to the department store and buy all the cheap $6 mice, because he would just smash them whenever he took a bad beat in the online poker.
Tilt can cost you a lot of money in more ways than one.
Yeah, I actually I didn't break a mouse, but I once threw a mouse. And it's actually a fairly expensive mouse throw, because what happened was, I took a bad beat, I was just losing money in a session. And so I threw the mouse, and it wasn't a wireless mouse. It was a wired mouse. So it sort of recoiled, so it didn't go where I meant it to throw it. And it actually crashed into my monitor and ended up breaking my monitor. So that was actually a really expensive one. I was intending to destroy this $5 mouse. Instead, I had to replace like a $400 screen. That was a really bad one. So, and when it happened and immediately happened, I broke my monitor, I actually started laughing. I started laughing at how silly of a thing that it was, that I'd allowed my emotions to get the best of me in that sort of way. And, I quit the session, of course, but it was sort of immediately off tilt, in that sense, because it was such a ridiculous thing for me to happen. Like I throw this mouse and end up breaking my monitor.
So you've heard that, everyone. Terrence's advice, if you're tilting, is smash your monitor and you'll be fixed.
Yeah. Well, if you can do it accidentally, that's probably the best way. If you break something completely different than the thing that you intended to broke, apparently that works.
And I mean, in terms of the mental game, over the years, do you believe it's becoming more important as people are becoming technically more proficient?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things about poker getting tougher is that the edges everywhere are smaller, right? So, we talked about how diligent the players today are in their studying, and a lot of it is because those edges are so small. And it's also important, you hear the guys at the World Series final tables, they're all making pure groups, and because their decisions are all in the 5-6 figure decision level. And so when you talk about getting things like poker mindset coaching, like what you guys do, it's hard. Like, for example, I don't know exactly how much value it is you guys provide. I wouldn't be able to say whether you guys provide an extra $50 an hour to win rate at this place, or $200 an hour. But I do know it must be something. And everybody is always hunting for these edges, and then they're hunting for edges in so many ways, in terms of finding games that are slightly better, improving their play slightly better, improving their mindset slightly better, being on a slightly better diet that makes them perform better in brain function. So that's certainly got to be a part of it. And anybody who's kind of looking to get just incrementally better at poker has to obviously consider, having a proper mindset.
So you heard it here first. We provide value.
Oh yeah, I mean, like I said, I don't know what value you guys provide, and of course, one of these really hard things to figure out how much, right? Because you might have a client, and it's not like you can say, well, he used to make $40 an hour, and now he makes $60 an hour, so clearly we're worth an extra $20 an hour to him, because you don't know, maybe is it because of that? Is he because he's playing in a different game? Is it this? Is it just variance? It's very hard.
It's impossible, impossible to put a figure on, I'm sure. I mean, it's just one of those difficult parts of the game. It's the same with any form of coaching. You have some idea that there's change, but you can never say exactly how much of it's the coach. Even when we're talking about we were talking to Dwayne and TJ last week. They've got an amazing coaching relationship, and Dwayne has absolutely changed TJ as a fighter, but it's still not something you can put a percentage on.
Yeah,
exactly.
I'm really looking forward to that, by the way, because, I mean, people have said such great things about Dwayne Ludwig as a coach, so I'm really curious.
He's a really, really good guy.
Yeah, cool.
I want him to coach me at poker, even though he knows nothing about poker.
Yeah.
He'll be enthusiastic.
Yeah, but just his way about him is amazing. So.
Yeah, this is a lot of fun. And then, Terrence, where can people watch your fight? And actually, I think this may be coming out a couple of days after your fight. So where would they be able to find your fight after your fight?
That might be hard because, I know that they often do it on pay-per-view. I don't know if they would restream it, but if they do, battlefieldfl.com. It's the Battlefield Fight League. If they restream it anywhere, it'll probably be there, or maybe their Facebook page. Or if somebody's nice enough to send me a copy of it, I'll put it on my own blog, which is terrencechanpoker.com. So my first name, Terrence, is 2 R's and an E, terrencechanpoker.com, or I might tweet it, and I'm at tchanpoker on Twitter.
And then you do the podcast as well on 2+2, don't you?
Yeah, pokercast.2plus2.com. Every week I've took over for longtime host Mike Johnson about the fall of last year. So I do that with Adam Schwartz. We talk about current events in poker, and it's about a 3-hour show. We do a lot of that, and maybe we'll have one of you guys on to talk on our show in the near future, and maybe because it's probably a lesser explored area of the poker world.
Oh,
awesome.
Wow, that sounds like a lot of fun. Well, thank you so much for coming on today, and good luck in your fight. And I look forward to watching you beat him up.
I will do my best, and look forward to seeing you at the World Series as well.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Cheers, Terrence.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
So great to have Terrence on the show talking about MMA and how poker's changed over the years. It's quite interesting to see those similarities between the two, isn't it, Trisha?
You know, he really did bring up the connection between like mental toughness and the mental toughness you have to have with fighting as well as what you have to have with poker. And I've kind of been thinking those same thoughts the more we've had, our MMA guests on. I'm like, it requires such a high level of mental toughness, and it's the same thing at the poker table.
And I actually believe it's the same thing for success in a number of different fields, on the golf course, in business. I mean, I even work with quite a few stockbrokers, and they're similar again as well. It's the same issues come up, and it's the same sort of mental toughness and level of focus that they're looking for to have that success.
Absolutely. And you know what? I thought it was super interesting that he talked about not getting into other games or other variants of the game and how maybe that was detrimental. So people think about that as you're developing your own game.
Yeah, it certainly opens other doors and gives you different options as the years go by. Well, I mean, it's another great guest this week, and we look forward to talking to you all next week.